Welcome back to Veritas Live, and I am Demetrius Malbro, and I'll be guiding you through today's episode where we're diving into compliance risks around data migration. Also, be sure to let us know where you are watching from by typing into the chat window. And also, as usual, we welcome all of your questions in the chat window. So I'd like to introduce Noemi Greyzdorf, data migration evangelist with Interlock Technology.
Hi, Demetrius. Nice to be here. Thanks.
And also Rick Krieger, Director of Product Management here at Veritas.
Hey, Demetrius. Hey, everyone. Good to see you again.
Awesome. And also, in usual fashion, before we get started, I like to start things off with an icebreaker and just kind of talk about some of the things that, number one, are light and easy. So what about maybe some of your travel plans, maybe the coolest place you've been, or maybe a place where you'd like to go? How about you, Noemi?
I love to travel, so there's never a shortage of places to go. We are planning a short trip to Europe for about 10 days. We're going to Latvia, and then we're going to spend a few days in Berlin. So very excited. Yeah, super excited.
That sounds exciting as well. I guess I'll add those things to my list as well. And Rick, where are you heading?
You know, it's interesting, Noemi. I was in Berlin in 2017, and I was surprised they all had Tesla Model S's at the airport. I thought that was as taxis. But this summer, I'm going to be going, our daughter graduated college, and we're going to take her to Germany, Munich, Fussen, and then we're going to head down to Italy. And never been to Italy before, so that should be fun. What could possibly go wrong?
Knock on wood. But we can recover, you know, if something does go wrong. But before we dive into the topic, let's talk a little bit about what about some of the disaster data migrations that have happened, or maybe some of the biggest misnomers around data migration. Do any one of you have any interesting stories that you'd like to share as well, maybe before we dive into the show?
I think, let me just put it in, data migration is sort of under, people don't think about it as a complex activity. It's sort of like, well, you know, if I have data here, I just move it over there, and everything should align. I'm going to give you an analogy that I think is going to resonate with most folks. So you created a file, for example, like 5 years ago, and whatever the Windows Word version you were using, or Excel or PowerPoint, anything like that. And you stored it in your folder, and it's sitting there, and then, you know, you wanted to open it and you want to use it, you want to republish it, or you want to edit it and make some adjustments and then republish it. And you go to open it, and the Word app says to you, oh, wait a second, you know, in order to open it, we have to change the format, or we have to change it somehow to update it to the most current version. And oh, by the way, some of the formatting that existed in that file beforehand is probably not going to transition into the new one. Mm-hmm. We've all experienced that, right? Same thing with, you have a graphic that was created by an application. One of the examples one of my colleagues was given is like a movie, right? So you have a movie, you want to download it to iOS, and it says, sorry, we can't do it. It's a different format, so you have to go and figure something out. This can be directly correlated to the challenges that I think typical migrations face that people don't really think about, which is when you're moving data, and especially if you're migrating across protocols. So let's say you're moving it from a NAS to an object store from an S3, or you're moving it even within the protocol from one vendor to another vendor. The challenge is that those protocols and those systems define how data is stored, how the metadata is stored, the formats, the securities, the permissions very differently, sometimes extremely differently. And in order for that data to be accessible, once you actually complete the migration, is you have to do data transformation. That's the action that is built into Word that says, hey, we're going to change it around, and then you're going to have to go fix it. So
yeah,
that's an important thing to consider and think about.
Yeah, it sounds a little cumbersome, and I remember running into a similar problem as well. And just want to let the audience know that during the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to explore enterprise data challenges within organizations and also some of the IT best practices that these organizations need to implement in order to protect their data and also stay in compliance throughout the process. And that's a big challenge. And so what are the major challenges that IT organizations need to be aware of when they are migrating data, whether it's on premises or to the cloud, or even repatriating that data back on prem? Rick, what do you think about that?
Yeah, what I see happening mostly with customers, things that they have to deal with. Number one is, do I need to migrate at all, right? So the concept of play it where it lies, like, why are you migrating the data? Make sure you have a good answer for that, because, it's just like anything else. You're not going to want to take risk unless you need to take that risk. There's some benefit or some outcome that you need for that. And migrating data is risky, right? No, if anyone tells you otherwise, they're not being truthful. So that's the big one. Know why you're migrating, and then do it only when you need to. The time it takes, there's going to be disruption in your production activities of, like, that data was important enough to migrate. So what are you doing with it? And it's in migration phase. What are you going to do there? That time, shrinking that time is important. The costs get pretty high with data migration too. So you want to keep that into check and then use that as a factor as to what to migrate and how much. And also the completeness. If some data is going to be broken, right? If that's been sitting there for a long time, so long that you have to migrate it, then Murphy's Law says there's something broken there. You're going to come across those things. You're going to have to deal with those. So those are the big ones.
Awesome. Noemi, what do you have to say about that? Do you have anything similar to mention, or maybe something different?
No, absolutely. A lot of challenges with migration. To start off, you have to understand what data you have, and to Rick's point, like, do you really need to migrate it? Not only why you're migrating it, but is this data, in a compliance sense, is it still under the regulation, right? So let's say oftentimes organizations are reluctant to delete data in their environments. And so I don't know what value it's going to have. Maybe nobody wants to make a decision and take ownership of it. And so, or you might have some orphan data. So understanding what data you have and whether you need to migrate it to Rick's point is really, really important. Second thing is understanding that if you're doing migration because you need to upgrade your storage infrastructure, for an example, that you are going to need resources of that source system as well as network connectivity to actually pull the data and migrate it to the new environment. And that's just physics in a way. So there are things that can be done to accelerate it, to expedite it, but fundamentally, data is only going to move as fast as whatever resources are thrown at it. The migration itself, as I mentioned already, and Rick alluded to this as well, is that older data, you might have to transform it, right? Because in the older environment, metadata was associated with a file in a certain way. It has to be moved. I'll give you an example where we had a migration where the application actually didn't keep a separate database of the metadata. Metadata was attached to the file, and there were lots and lots, like hundreds metadata pieces. And so that all of that had to be moved forward, but the way the metadata was managed in the new environment was different. So you had to transform it to make it compliant with the application. And in the compliance arena, when you're migrating, you're actually moving something. So you're changing, and you need to be able to prove to regulatory bodies that that data has not been altered. The actual content has not been altered. So you really need to have a audit trail and reporting capabilities to make sure that you can demonstrate that, yes, I did move the data and I did have to have some forms of transformation around, metadata permissions or security, but that the actual data has not been modified.
Awesome, awesome. And I have not forgotten about those that are tuning in. So please, please be sure to ask your questions in the chat. And I see, let's see, people tuning in from Mumbai, from Jordan, Michigan, Oregon, Sweden, Montreal, Turkey, Armenia, Paris, and Kuwait. Wow. Thank you all for tuning in. And I really appreciate you being here. So I also want to find out as well from you, Rick or Noemi, what do organizations need to consider when they are planning a major data migration to keep up or to keep this data compliant through the transition? Rick, why don't you go?
Yeah, I mean, channeling my inner mechanical engineer, it's my schooling. My industrial engineering friends told me about a principle, which I use actually when I was doing some work, about reducing touches. If you're in a factory or you're designing a process, and this applies, it's amazing how these things apply across disciplines, right? But if you're designing a process to build something, you know, they don't put the hoods over here and the engines over and their brakes over there and then kind of move them around the factory. They kind of organize things in a line and they try to reduce the amount of touches of the item as they move it from station to station to get the final product. And that concept is alive and well necessary for data migration, because you want to try to limit the amount of times you're touching that data. Because each time you're touching it, as Noemi was saying, you know, you want to prove that you haven't altered it. So that's another opportunity or another requirement that you have to prove that you didn't mess with that thing in this process. So reducing the number of touches is important. So if you can go from point A to point B without having a lot of intermediaries, that's good thing. You want to maintain that. You want to maintain control of the data, or the chain of custody, as people say, which is important, and that comes, as Naomi was saying, also with good reporting. So the way you do that is you limit the number of touches, you limit the risk involved, and you document that as you go through the process. So you can prove that these items here have gone through from point to point, and you've maintained control of that item and you haven't altered it.
All right. And Noemi, I'm going to ask you to jump in a minute, but I want to go back to the chat window. If you have ran into any type of disasters or problems while you were in the middle of a data migration, please type that in the chat window as well. Share your story. Also ask questions as well, and we'll be sure to see if we can answer those questions for you as well. So Noemi, what do you think about the procedures around IT organizations and some of the top challenges that need to be considered?
So one of the things that we have seen happen often, and this is, so Rick described perfectly what you want to do when you're dealing with compliance. The things that I would add is oftentimes you have, you want to do the migrations as quickly as possible because there's costs associated with dragging it out. Organizations, enterprises really need to do a lot of planning when they're doing a major migration up front. And this is determine how much bandwidth you're going to have. What are the resources? Who needs to approve any kind of changes that may have to be made to the environment? What's going to be deployed, how it's going to be done, all the sign-offs. Because one of the things that we have run into is you start the process and somehow it stops. Why? Well, you know, somebody went on vacation or somebody has to sign something. They have to determine. It's not really clear how it plays with the compliance and regulations, whether it's good or bad. So getting all that sorted out up front is going to first expedite the migration itself, which reduces the cost in the long term. But it also, to Rick's point, is going to limit the touches and the interruptions that have to happen to the data as you're doing the migration. If you have it all set up and sort of processed beforehand, then it'll move more smoothly. If you have to make a lot of interruptions and a lot of people have to kind of touch either the process or the data itself, then you're going to have a lot more difficult time of documenting and proving controls.
Okay. Awesome. And I am looking in the chat again, and no one has a question. Oh, okay. Looks like a question just came in. Or maybe it's a statement. Let's see. An aspiring software developer. I love that. Have recently completed their Bachelor's of Technology in Computer Science. So congratulations on that. Is also looking for advice and connections in the chat. All right. So please feel free to network and also connect with each other. And that's exactly why Veritas Live is here. So we can bring the community together and have conversations that are somewhat complex, but hopefully we make them sound simple. Also, let's maybe discuss one more thing here. Data migration has been a challenge, and since we have moved from on-premises environments into more of a cloudy world, and you also have SaaS applications, et cetera, has there been any challenges with moving from, let's say, an on-premises environment to the cloud and maybe bringing that data back? Is there anything else that any one of you would like to mention just around some of the challenges, or maybe even the best practices or insights if someone is considering a move like that?
Yeah, I'll start off now. Again, sorry. I mean, as I was saying before, the first thing is, why are you migrating? Make sure you understand why you're migrating. That's a big challenge. Some people just do it because they're neat freaks, right? They feel like, okay, I've got to close this chapter and do this here and that. Of course, this data has to come, but you have to ask yourself, how long does that data need to live anyway? What's the retention for that? If it's going to have an expiration date soon, it may be better to just play it where it lies. But if you have to migrate it, then the biggest challenge I see is some companies try to either do it themselves, right? So like, why would you do a job, a one-time in your lifetime job? Why would you try to be an expert and nail that on something that important, right? You want to use a professional. So use professionals that do this sort of thing. They've done it before. They're not encumbered with your internal garbage that you have to deal with at work. You have other things, operational and strategic things you have to do, right? So that's a project in itself. It's a big project, as Noemi said. It's treated as such. Hire a professional. If you're going to do a complex electrical job in your house, I'm hiring an electrician, right? I can do it, maybe, but I don't need to be perfect at that. I'll go hire somebody to do that. You want to use a tool that's purpose-built. That's really important. Like, you don't want to just cobble something together. You want to use a tool that was designed for that activity. It's been tested and worked through. And with anything else in software, as you use something, it gets better, right? So you want to use something that's been in process for a while. Also, it needs to be supported. I mean, this seems pretty obvious, Captain Obvious here, but I mean, why would you try to use a tool that wasn't supported by the source and the target that you're taking the data from and sending it to, right? You want to make sure you've got support. If there's a problem, then those people that operate the tool, that make the tool, need to be able to get support for it from those people. And that's, it would be insanity to use a tool. Like, you wouldn't do that for your production environment. You're not going to use like a productivity tool. Like, your end users aren't going to log into a mail system that's not supported, right? So obviously you're doing all that, right? So so those are the key points there.
Okay, awesome. Noemi, you good?
Yeah, sure. I'll add to that. So migration to and from the cloud are a little bit more complex than people think. First of all, you got to understand how much data you're moving. So pipe becomes critical. And if you're moving it over long distances, you have to consider network latencies. So, if you're trying to move a petabyte of data over a 1 gig link, it's going to take you some time. So understand that. Now, if you are going to opt to, for example, copy the data, there's like a snowball services, for example, Amazon has, just as an example, where they send you an array, you copy the data into the array, you ship the array, and then they ported the data into their environment. Keeping in mind that shipping data in an array has its own risks associated, not only security risks, but risk to, fires, accidents. I mean, there's lots of different things. I mean, think of anything that can happen to a piece that is being moved, but it has your really critical compliance data. So keep that in mind. So moving to the cloud. Now, moving to the cloud from a cost perspective, the cloud vendors are very happy to take your data and they're going to be storing it, and it all looks really great. Now, if you are going to be repatriating data or pulling data out of the cloud for any purposes, keep in mind that there are costs associated with it, and they're not insignificant. So once you are in the cloud and you are trying to repatriate the data, for example, if you choose to do that, really, and this is even more critical when you're doing the repatriation than migration in general, is really know what's expiring soon, what really needs to be retained for an extended period of time, because it is really costly to do it. So if data is going to expire in the next few months or maybe even 12 months, is it worth migrating it, repatriating it to the on-premises environment? Is the cost going to justify doing that? So keep all of those things in mind. And obviously, the cloud service providers are going to throttle your ability to move data out of the cloud. So that's, again, if you have a really large data set, it becomes costly. So before you choose where you're going to move your data, how you're going to store it, do some financial analysis, do some operational analysis, figure out what you really need for your organization before you actually go there. Other than that, some of the other things to consider is, again, even though, let's say you store your data in an object store, an S3 kind of protocol system, and you're moving it to the cloud where it's also, let's say, some form of a REST API or S3 specifically, that there's a lot of variability and how you store data, how you store the metadata, how you do permissions, how you do retentions. All of that need to be taken into consideration and planned ahead. And to Rick's point, when you're looking at tools, look for tools that can do that for you. Because if it's just a rsync or if it's just a robocopy, there are all these other things that you yourself are going to have to do versus using a professional tool or a service that has developed ways to automate those things, to take those things off your hands and make it sort of simpler, faster, more effective.
All right, Noemi and Rick, you both knocked it out of the park, and seemed like a lot of questions started rolling in later on. 3 or 4 of the questions that were rolling in, and they were all around migrating properly, how to migrate properly. So if we don't have a chance to get to your questions here, we'll be sure to reply back to you to make sure we get you an answer. And also, as we start wrapping up here, if you want to read more on Interlocks for paving the path to data mobility, we have a link to that below in the show notes. And also, Noemi, would you like to say a little bit about that asset or any last thoughts?
Sure. So Interlock has been migrating complex environments at scale for over a decade. We've done petabytes and petabytes and petabytes, over 1,000 successful migrations. The document that we have provided a link to actually describes what it is that we do specifically. So we call it a cubed any data to any storage anywhere migration. So from across any unstructured, this is unstructured data specifically. So wherever your data lies, whatever storage system it is, we can do it. And it goes into a little bit more description of the services, the challenges, and also the services. So there's a concept of data extraction, transformation, and then, of course, migration. So it really talks about, it might actually answer some of the questions that are being posed. How do you actually do migration properly? So take a look. Okay.
Awesome. And we also have more to share as well. We have a Vox blog post that's out there as well on Direct Migrator, the best way to migrate from Enterprise Vault to Enterprise Vault Cloud. Also another asset, it's called Data Migration Solutions on the Veritas.com website. It's a white paper, how to migrate from any on-premise archive into Veritas Alta archiving. And also my favorite, 7 steps to a successful archive migration. And Rick, any last thoughts or comments on those assets?
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, use the right tool for the right job. And as we mentioned before, that we have tools that do that. Noemi's company, Interlock, has been doing stuff for a long time, and they have very good tools for specific use cases. In the spirit of reducing the number of touches, and you're moving across the cloud, all the stuff Noemi said about the bandwidth is very important, but that is the way to do. Where are people migrating today? Are they migrating from one storage platform to another on-prem? Probably not. Where are they going? They're going from on-prem to cloud. So you want to use a tool that's doing that and making sure that it's reducing those number of touches, going direct and with the highest integrity. And that's, we won't get into our own tool, but that we have a tool that does that side of it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you, Noemi. And also join us for the next episode of Veritas Live on June 27th, where we're going to talk about the evolution of healthcare technology and also the related rise of cyber attacks with Richard Statings and our very own Tim Berlowski. So until then, everyone, stay secure and back up often. Thank you.